Well, I think that we ended off on the last video of getting through that initial consideration that stops you from doing whatever it is that you really would want to do. Now the thing is that if you think about it, it's not like it's not brain surgery or rocket science. Those are the two, aren't those the two things that they always cite? It's not an impossible situation if you just consider that you can just do one thing. Now, one of the things that I used to struggle with was that I'd made what I consider a terrible mistake. When my father wrote to the bandmaster of the band that I was to join, and I was accepted, I was just 15 and a half, and I gotta hold on for just a second. I was just 15 and a half. When I went through the recruiting, I'd been accepted in the band. Go to them, tell them that you are going in, you've been accepted for the band of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, and they will make sure that you get to us. That's what the recruitment offices were for. If you went there and you didn't know, they would advise you where you could go, but if not, if you had already agreed to be and been accepted for a particular place in the army, then they would be beholden to send you there. So when I signed on the dotted line, of course I'm 15 years old and my father's not thinking in these terms anyway, and the recruitment sergeant is very convincing. He said, yeah, but well, why don't you thank God he didn't start me off for 22 years. He said, why don't you do 6 years? Now what he didn't tell me was that the 2.5 years until I got to 18 years old didn't count out of the 6 years. So I'd already served 2.5 years before I even got to start my contract of 6 years. Now, in the first year, I thought everything was so new. I thought, well, this isn't what I wanted to do. Obviously, it's got to get better. Oh boy, did it get better? No, it bloody well didn't. It got worse, because the more that I grew up, the more that I hated being in the army. So I'm really struggling with everyday life at that point, because I couldn't accept what they were saying was a good life. Now, if you're in America, you would have been the effect of the little sayings that they come up with to help people to join the army, even though it's not a great thing. That, like an army of one, remember that when you go in, you're so important that, my God, that army, you are the army, you're the one, which actually is a load of bullshit. So I quickly saw this. Now, until I actually got to the age of, I think, 18, which is when I left the boys' school in Aberdeen, and I went and started my 6 years with the band of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. Well, I'd already seen them because I was in Berlin with them at first. Also, I did, as a non-playing person, just somebody filling in a place in the band. They gave me an instrument. I was given a clarinet just to hold so that I could march up and down. And I did 2 military tattoos. One, I did a military tattoo, I think it was in Woolwich, in the south of England. And then another one I did, oh no, White City. That was where That was the White City was the military tattoo. I did one of their tattoos there where the bands march up and down, and I also did the Edinburgh tattoo as somebody, as an instrument carrying person, not as anybody doing anything other than just marching up and down, being one of the number. Okay, so I did that, and then by the time I got to the band, it was a shock to me, shock to the system, to find out that I was going to have to find a way to get through 6 years of a life that I really didn't like. So that started a system for me of rebellion that really was a tough time. When I was at first, when I was just a boy, there was only 2 of us. When I got to Stirling, I was in the castle there in Stirling. They didn't know what to do with us. They put this corporal who was about to be demobbed after doing quite a long time in the army, and he was the kindest man. And of course, at that point, he's got no problems about instilling. He was a corporal, Jim. I remember him as Jim, and a very kind man. Well, I was in there with one other boy until they decided where they were going to send us, you see, or when. And he looked at the other boy. The other boy was a boy called Mullin. His name was Mullin, and he was a brilliant piper, bagpipes, and he was destined to go to the military band, the pipe band. Now, the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders is a famous regiment. Unfortunately, well, it's been disbanded now, amalgamated with something else probably. But they had a pipe band and a military band. See, so these are what are called line bands, just where it's a brigade of 1,000 people, I think, in a regiment. And they have their own name and their own culture and all of that. But this was the Scottish band, and they're mainly Scottish people, soldiers, musicians in that band. Didn't suit me at all. Well, I had to learn to be able to live that life. I had to learn to be able to well, I had to be able to learn to shut my mouth was one thing, which was difficult. Come on. Sorry, I'm talking to other people who are driving and not moving very fast. So we're actually in Taliban now, but anyway. So I had that to cope with. Now, during that time, I was learning. So I was learning to play, and there were some very good players in that band, but I wasn't popular obviously because my attitude and what I thought about the military came through, and I must have been a very awkward kid to have around. Got to remember, I'm still only, wow, that's an electrical cable that's hanging down so low it hit the roof. Welcome to the Philippines. So I didn't get along in that band at all, and while I'd been in Aberdeen, there'd been another kid there who I got along very well with, and he decided that it wasn't for him, either. So this is this is part of an adventure. I'm going to be going backwards and forwards in these videos, so time is a very flexible thing. If I go back to when I was in Aberdeen, that was where I joined a small boys group, where all of the youngsters who were pre-18 were going there to have their initial training, not in the military. We all were there, and very few of us had done any military training. I never did any military training. I never fired a gun. 8.5 years I never fired a gun when I was in the army. And the emphasis was on the fact that we were musicians. Now, there wasn't enough kids there to have a band, but there was a very good band leader there who had been put in charge of this boys' school, and he was a good teacher. And also there was another man there that was, I remember him as Taffy. Back then, if anybody came from Wales, they called him Taffy, and if anybody came from from Scotland, usually was called Jock. Life was simple there. So anyway, I won't tell you what they called me. So while we were there, the corporal that was our main person in charge of us, he lived, the barracks itself had about, there must have been about 10, maybe 12 or 15 kids there, all on different instruments, and they would be able to get some training prior to going to their different regiments, regimental bands. But this man was, he was a complex man. He was getting towards the end of his career, but he was quite creative. I've already said this about how back then we're all boys, of course, 16, 17, and he formed a small dance group, right? I'm not talking about ballroom dancing, I'm talking about Scottish dancing, and we became Highland dancers, and he actually was in very good shape himself, as you would expect of a dancer, and he was a very good dancer. He taught us how to do the Highland fling, and we also did, he taught us how to do the sword dance. Now, with the sword dance, if it's a single person, they lay the sword down. It's not crossed swords. They lay the sword down, crossed with, like this, crossed like this, with the scabbard, right? So they lay them down in a cross, and then you dance over them into the 4 spaces of the cross. So I learned how to do that. For the life of me, I can't remember whether I was any good, but I remember that he also taught us 4 people doing an extended version of the sword dance, where these large swords, claymores, are laid down, and then you do around a square. And I remember that we certainly got good enough at it. He was a very good teacher, and we got good enough at it that we accepted a gig. He got a gig for us, and we went to the local the British Legion. We went to the British Legion, a little tin pot place that was close to where we were in Aberdeen. And anyway, we took the 4 claymores with us, and we got on stage, and they set all of these large, like a large sword, and they set them in a square with the tips pointing into each other. So we did that, and the piper started up. There's a small audience of about 60 or 100 people, right? And as we started to dance, it requires quite a lot of jumping up and down, okay? What we didn't appreciate at the time was that the stage was made up of loose boards. So as we jumped up and down, the boards were flexing, and as they flexed, the swords were going up and down, going everywhere. I must have deliberately forgotten the end to that, but anyway, it didn't end well. But I think it probably made a good comedy act. And anyway, that was one of the things that happened there. So this is all that sometimes. What's the lesson there? The lesson is sometimes what can be a terrible experience at the time can turn out to be a great story to tell. So I'll end off this one now. But before I do that, I'll tell you the other side of that thing with that man. His name was Gren, and he started to get quite tyrannical, and in a bad, well, tyrannical, it has to be bad, doesn't it? But he started to victimize some of the weaker kids. And we went through a couple of tough times where he would have us marching as punishment, marching in formation out in the parade ground late at night in the rain, and stuff like that, stuff that you see in the movies where these sergeants have incredible power to punish. Well, we started to really get ticked off about this, you know. We were all very unhappy, and what he had done was he had blamed some of the punishments that he had inflicted upon us. He blamed it on one particular kid, and that kid really wasn't to blame. And what he was implying that the rest of us should beat this kid up so that he towed the line, so that he behaved himself according to the corporal. And I can remember saying at the time, this is not right. And between ourselves we all agreed that it wasn't right. And I said, what he's doing to this one person, he will end up doing to you and you or me. And of course it did come back to my turn, but we'd already gotten around that. Well, anyway, when we were sitting around talking as kids will do about what can we do about this, you know, and I remember saying that, well, what we could do is we could all desert. It's not deserting, you're going absent without leave, AWOL. So we could go absent without leave, and that would bring the world tumbling around around his head. So anyway, what would we do? Well, we could go in uniform, and we could just say that we were on exercises, initiative exercises, and we could hitchhike wherever, we could go home, and we could do that. And so timing is everything. Right at that time I went into hospital to have some foot surgery, and while I was in there I discovered that things had reached they reached a climax, a bad point, and these kids, the rest of the kids, had done what I'd said was a good idea. Well, at first I was suspected of being the one, because I told you my attitude was such, and so it looked like it could come back to me, but because I was in hospital, then it couldn't. But anyway, they went, and some of them went, and the guy got in trouble. He got in bad trouble, and it got sorted out. He was hauled in. They didn't do anything to the kids, of course. What can they do? 15 and 16 and 17-year-old kids playing at being soldiers, what could they do? So all was forgiven, and he received a reprimand, and we all carried on. And then later I joined the Argylls. I think I joined them in Brentwood in Essex, but that's another video. But thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the reminiscing. Bye for now.